Vernon Brown. I'm the chairman of the board for the Institute. And it's my great pleasure to be able to introduce Bill Davenhall here in just a second. But I want to just take a bit of time to talk about how the Institute's moving forward and is taking kind of the call of this conference to look at the art of the possible and transform it into the actual, right? And I might add something to that. In doing, you become. And I think the Institute is very much focused on that. What are we doing to become? And I think that all of you that are here over the next 2 days have made that commitment to doing. And I think that is really a foundational goal of the Institute and why we want to advocate, educate, convene, and create a way in which we can transform health and human services. And so we are here over the next couple of days to challenge you to think differently and also to join with the Institute's goal of transforming health and human services, to both recognize that we have a responsibility to look at the way in which each individual comes into care or into service or touches that array and continuum of services that make up health and human services. And all of you in some way are connected to that. And we hope that one of the goals that we accomplish on Friday is that we will come to a place where we will actually have doable things, that we will take the potential and actualize it. And in so doing, we will become something different and we will transform health and human services. So it's my great pleasure to have our board member, Bill Davenhall, come up and speak to his future orientation. And it's a great pleasure for me to be a participant with the robust group of folks that are on the board of directors, and they're in your biographies. Because we are all, we sit and think, you know, and we sit and talk. And part of why we open up the conference or the symposium about having a question of consequence is to have the time to actually think in that way. Most of the time we just go to conferences and we are delivered content and people think, oh, that's a great idea, right? And then at the point in time that we move to a place where we want to actualize it or make it something that we can take with us, we have to go back into our siloed locations and organizations and try to accomplish that. So again, it's my great pleasure to introduce Bill and have him kind of talk a little bit about the upcoming symposium during the course of the next 2 days. And then Daniel, I think, has decided that he's like the tour guide, I guess, Daniel, of the agenda, and is going to kind of go over more of the specifics of the agenda. Right, usually you go to a symposium, right? Somebody sits and tells you what's going to happen the whole time. We're going to wait to the end of our conversations, and Ori kind of set the stage for the art of the possible. And what's really cool is that there's a lot of state-of-the-art here in the room too as well. So take care of it.
Thank you, Vernon. I'm so delighted that Ari didn't talk about Jonathan Swift. I was afraid you were going to go there. That about vision is really the art of seeing the invisible. And it's a kind of a contradiction of terms, but if you think about it, is that everybody that's in this room is here because you want to do two things. You want to improve your vision about what's going to be in the future. And I know you all have problems to solve, and that's why we gave you this. See, that's a vision tool, because you can still work at night. So thanks for being here and taking the time to be here. So hopefully what I'm about to say could be maybe profound, but I was thinking about the company that I've been working with, Esri, for almost 20 years, is in a little community of Southern California. I think we might have 90,000 people now. It's in San Bernardino County. And we have a community music association in our town. It's the longest running continuous community music association that I think exists in the world. It's kind of interesting. It hasn't been interrupted by war, and in the war years it went on. And in that little open air theater are some words that every member of the community, which I'm talking about hundreds of thousands of millions of people over lifetimes, over 100 years, have stared at these words. And it says essentially, without vision, people perish. The people perish. You know, and every time you sit down in that theater, it strikes you that what drives us forward as a group of people, as a community, as a nation, is this thing called vision. And what we're talking about here today is that we all have poor vision. I mean, we come here every year and talk about all the problems we have. And what we're really searching for are better tools, better equipment, which is sometimes called technology, better words to describe this thing. But what we're all about is we want that machine that's in the ophthalmology office, you know, the refractory machine. How many people know what I'm talking about? That machine you put your face into, and what does the technician or the doctor keep saying to you? Does this look better? Does this look better? Does this look better? And you know, after about 15 minutes of that, what are you thinking? Like you have no idea. And of course, you don't know that the technician is saying, this person's crazy. I didn't change anything, and they're telling me it's better. So what I want to do is welcome you to this, and as a member of the board of the Stewards of Change, I would say, this is our mission. Our mission is really to work on improving that vision. We may not have all the answers today. I know we don't have all the answers. But we're going to continue this process of asking you, is this better? Is this better? And I hope you can get used to that, because we believe until we help correct the vision is that we sometimes are going to lose our way. So with that, I'd like to again say thank you for being here and taking your time to be with us and have this discussion. Thank you. Jamie?
So I'm going to just spend a little time kind of reviewing a little bit of some conceptual approach that we've taken over the last couple of years, and also a little history, and then kind of walk through the agenda, because I want to show the connectivity to what we've been doing, what we're doing here, and where we're headed as a result of these conversations. So I've been using this more lately. Some of you might have been seeing this. And this played really well. Earlier in the week, we were at the Health Data Palooza. How many people were at the Health Data Palooza? Great. So a bunch of folks there. So only a couple were in my session, I know, because I counted everybody there. But Shell and I had a chance to speak there. But the other H in HHS is Human Services. So it is the Department of Health and Human Services. And so my radical proposal, which I've started to socialize with Brian Civic and Dwayne Spradlin, who had HHS and other places, is to actually change the name and change it from the Department of Health and Human Services to the Department of Human and Health Services. Radical, I might say. I haven't gotten there, but I will report that at the opening in front of this giant 2,000-person amphitheater inside the Marriott Wortley Park there, both Brian, who was the master of ceremonies, came out and actually talked about health and human services. And so, and then also Dwayne Spradlin, who's the CEO of the Health Data Palooza, also came out and talked about health and human services. So I count it as a win that the words are coming out of their mouth. And Shell and I actually held up the community track there talking about human services, and I suspect there was some other conversation that's beginning to permeate. And for those of you who were here last year, you remember Brian spoke, and it's beginning to permeate the language, which is important, because we think about healthcare, and this event yesterday was quite astounding with the release of all of this open data that the federal government is now just tsunami of information that's coming out. We forget, and the entrepreneurism and the innovation, we forget, that while health is a $2.5 trillion market, it's human services that really drive so much of that in terms of the outcomes. And for those of you who are adherents of the social determinants of health, we believe, well, you can see that the actual, if you look at population health outcomes, the actual impact of health care services, hospitals, clinics, medicines, really only contribute a small percentage of one's overall well-being and health outcomes. It's the other stuff. It's the 3-4-50 from our friends from San Diego, which we'll hear about later. It's about behaviors. It's about socioeconomic, demographic factors, where you live, where you work, where you don't work for that matter, and the physical environment, which contributes a majority. Again, Pareto shows up here, 80-20, 75-20, something of that nature, really contributing to the impact of our health and well-being. I've been reading costs of healthcare. 75% of our costs of healthcare are attributable to preventable chronic diseases. And 2/3 of the increase in our cost of healthcare is also attributable to preventable chronic disease. Preventable chronic disease originates, in my opinion, in a lot of the work that we do in human services. Do you have a home? Do you have nutrition? Do you have education? Do you have a job? Are you able to do and live so that you can take care of your well-being, of your children's well-being, of your community's well-being? And so our priorities are focused on health care and the dramatic impact of that. Obviously, as things get acute or chronic, it's important for us to pay attention to that, of course. But can we back up upstream to be thinking about how we prevent that? And that's really, in many ways, the connecting point, right? It's the low touch or the high touch, low cost kinds of things that are so important to keeping people in homes or in their home after they've been released from the hospital, so you can minimize the readmission because they have proper food and nutrition. They're able to get their medicines, they're able to get to their doctors because there's transportation. There's somebody who comes into their home to be able to take care of them and to bathe them and to clean their home and to get food. Those are the non-sexy things that require day-to-day activity and a lot of connectivity all the way out to the fringes of our systems, which we don't do a great job of today. So I'm driven by that perspective. I also like to think about who's in our human services systems, right? So there's 54 million, or probably 57 million people now with the newly eligible Medicaid and CHIP folks. But if you look at some of the other systems, our SNAP programs, child support, development disabilities, unemployment, WIC, LAHEAP, you add these together, and certainly there's overlapping populations here. We're looking at a significant percentage of the population who's touching our health and our human services programs. And so we need to pay attention to that. Obviously, paying attention to that is not an easy thing with all those people coming into our systems all the time. So over the years, we have been looking at and studying this and have had the good fortune, originally with some foundation support, to be able to go out and study systems that were doing this work. And we uncovered, really, in almost like an archaeological perspective, what systems were doing that were being successful at connecting their various silos. So we went to a number of places, mostly counties, actually, originally, who were able to successfully accomplish some level of interoperability and information sharing. And what we found was a series of change drivers, or domains, whatever you might want to call them, that seemed to be consistent everywhere you'd go. And regardless of the door you come into, whether or not it's a child welfare door or adult protection or health door or food and nutrition door or mental health door, the leaders of those organizations all paid attention in some way in their leadership capacity to these domains of activity, right? And if you think about it, it's fairly obvious when you think about it, but if you're looking at it changing systems at scale, if you miss any of those things, you oftentimes will be not successful. And so the folks that we did have the opportunity to learn from and study from all had some activity. They had some awareness of their level of sophistication, their level of capacity, their level of knowledge around these things. So they knew going into it, or in the midst of it, as they discovered it, where their strengths were, where their weaknesses were, and some places they didn't know a lot about some of these things. And so as we began to look at these things, we began to study them and try to understand how to assess them and analyze those things. And over the last number of years, we have had the good fortune to be able to dive into these various drivers and create assessments around them, and to be able to work with states and counties, and actually at the Administration for Children and Families, to try to infuse this sort of multidisciplinary thinking into the way we need to think about it. And again, it flies in the face of specialization and siloization, where we all are most comfortable. Our education systems bring us up that way. Our lives, our work, all are very much about what we do, when we do it, how we do it. Specialization, how we think laterally and across the segments, is not an easy thing to do. And so in your materials, there are some copies of some documents that we've prepared around that, and certainly many of you have been to our website to look at that. And so we discussed that, and these ideas are really infused in the conversations we're having. And part of the idea of this was to create a language, as we were saying, that we can communicate across our silos, right? So we know what we're talking about when we're talking about it. And without spending a whole lot of time talking about theories of change, we've proposed some ways of thinking about this work, whether or not it's a policy issue, whether or not it's an infrastructure issue, or if it's a practice issue, right? If you think about those three columns, those three areas, if I'm having a policy conversation with you, and it's really, you're having a technology conversation with me, we need to know what kind of conversation we're having in order to be able to come to a solution. And part of this idea of the drivers is to have a conversation to say, we're now talking about workforce issues. We're not ignoring the other ones, but right now we know that we have a need because unfunded pensions, perhaps, or retirement in the workforce, that we need to pay attention to. And so it helps within an organization to be able to look at these things, share what they are, and to be able to communicate with and amongst not only the leadership team, but throughout the organization, so people know what we're focused on and why we're focused on those things. Because guess what? We may have a lot of strengths in many of these areas, and some we don't. And so let's focus on those areas that we need to develop, especially we're going to go do something as complicated as interoperability and connecting systems and silos across the whole range of programs that, again, many of you are dealing with in your organizations right now. So that's kind of the conceptual frame. I know many of you may have been aware of this already. We've shared it, you've looked at our stuff, we've worked with you, you've seen it. But I just offered up there, as we're having these conversations, as a way to focus on what it is we're talking about. And some of the exercises that come up are actually focused on some of these specific drivers so that we can understand them better. Just briefly, over the last year, it's been a busy last year for us. And I just want to quickly show a couple of things, not in any great detail here, what we've been up to in our work, because this work over the last 10 years, but particularly last year, has brought us to today and brought us to this symposium in terms of the kinds of thinking the people in the room that are here have been involved in this conversation. We've been involved with the conversation with them. So over the last year, we had, right before our last year's symposium, we actually started a project in California with the Office of System Integration and the Department of Health and Human Services under one of the HCF OMB interoperability grants to look at a California roadmap, where we had similar conversations to this with folks from across the state and the county and locals, to talk about governance and legal issues and information technology and organizational change management across a very large state. Begin that kind of conversation. How do you do that in a state the size of a country? And the leadership recognized that it starts with conversation. It starts with getting people in a room, be able to talk about the issues, to focus specifically on some of these drivers are some of the most critical drivers. And you will see them come back later in this conversation over the next couple of days. How do we think about these things carefully? And we were successful in developing a roadmap, which is still in the road mapping phase, but it's established a base and a foundation upon which to work. Last year we had the event here, the Achieving Interoperability, and from that event we developed a lot of work around personas and scenarios that I already talked about. How do we humanize How do we put social back in social services? As somebody recently quoted to me. How do we put the person in the middle of all of this complex work? And we discovered a way to think about personas, something that we had worked with my prior lifetime in consumer packaged goods, in segmentation. Who are your clients? Who are your customers? What do we know about them? What do they look like? What do they eat? What do they care about? What television do they watch? Where do they go to church? Where do they shop? What do we know about the people we're serving? Well, our systems don't necessarily provide us that information very effectively. What do we need to know about them? What are the strengths that they bring to the table that we can build on in their communities? So that was the basis of that. That work on personas we brought back to California, and will again surface here. We'll be doing some work on that. It's an important area to think about. We had the good fortune of being able to support Illinois in their work around developing governance toolkit. And we thought that is, in all the conversations we've had over the years around interoperability, that conversation around governance is hugely important. Even more so, again, as you begin to spread responsibility and authority across multiple agencies. And how do you do that? So Kathleen, Herb, Rachel, and others from our team, Richard, were deeply involved supporting that. And many of the people in the room contributed to that conversation. So now there's at least a place to go find some best practices, to go hear from folks who have been doing this work in San Diego and in Virginia and in New York and in Pennsylvania and Minnesota and various places. So we're beginning to sort of help support the tools so we don't have to start from scratch all the time. We need to move beyond the starting line. So this tool is available. I think, Kathleen, you guys have brought some materials. There's materials on the back table there for you to pick up, and it's all online. It's a beautiful, beautiful document and a good resource tool for folks. Again, earlier in the year in California, we, building off of the work we were doing there, actually last year at our annual event, Brian Civic started to talk a lot about open data. And so how many of you are familiar with the open data movement now? Let me see a hand. Okay, so great. So last year, this time it was, I think if I asked that question, it would have been half or less folks involved with that. It is the next tsunami of information. And again, yesterday or the day before in DC, with 2,000 people showing up to talk about open healthcare data, grown from 50 people or less the first year to 2,000 in 5 years. There's an incredible surge of interest in how do you use data. All of the information the federal government is now not even releasing, but sort of opening the floodgates for Medicare data and administrative data and pharmacy data is a treasure trove of information about us and about who's using our services and how we're using it, and unleashing the power of innovation and entrepreneurism. So we had the good fortune with support from the California Healthcare Foundation to actually do some of this. We brought together people in California to start to talk about open data, but from a health and human services perspective. And that was the first event of that kind. California and a number of states and jurisdictions here are actively pursuing the open data. What that means for us is really unclear in many ways, because of the magnitude of the information that's being made available, is, I think, going to tax all of us in our ability to accomplish, to meaningfully use that information, so to speak. And we talk about big data. Well, this is gargantuan data, right? If you start releasing records of 50 million people on the Medicare records, I'm not sure. We need some good tools. We need some smart people to help us. We haven't really ventured into that too much, I don't think, on the human services side. I know ECF has been releasing some of the human services data, and that is beginning to pervade into it. But the question is how and what does that look like? How can we use it, de-identified information to inform our decisions and to release the innovative, creative spirits out there in the world to help us do that? And then one of the critical drivers, we already heard about it earlier today, is confidentiality and privacy. It was one of the areas that we worked on for a number of years, and earlier in this year, our team was able to work in New York State to develop a privacy and confidentiality toolkit. Richard Gold, Rachel Pratt, Jerry Pape, and others from New York worked on that, and that is available for you to be able to see. We also worked with the National League of Cities to develop a toolkit for them they're about to release, which is very municipality focused and very educationally focused as well. So Richard, who's at the middle table there, is the architect for a lot of that work, and you can find him in the breaks to talk about it. And we will be talking more about confidentiality and privacy as we go forward. So, part of the reason I'm showing this is to say that there are substantive pieces of work that have been done. We've been a part of some of them. There's certainly lots of other things going on out there. So the resources are becoming available for us, and to be able to take those into our systems, we don't need to start from scratch to do this work. So I'm hoping this is going to work. This really distills and embodies, I think, what a lot of us are doing here in our own ways, and it's kind of a fun way of, hopefully it'll show up here, of what's required of us to make change here in this universe. I borrowed this from something we saw at Health Data Palooza the other day, so it's a interesting commentary.
If you've learned a lot about leadership and making a movement, then let's watch a movement happen start to finish in under 3 minutes and dissect some lessons. First, of course, a leader needs the guts to stand alone and look ridiculous. But what he's doing is so simple, it's almost instructional. This is key. You must be easy to follow. Now here comes the first follower with a crucial role. He publicly shows everyone else how to follow. Notice how the leader embraces him as an equal. So it's not about the leader anymore, it's about them, plural. Notice how he's calling to his friends to join in. So it takes guts to be a first follower. You stand out and you brave ridicule yourself. Being a first follower is an underappreciated form of leadership. The first follower transforms a lone nut into a leader. If the leader is the flint, the first follower is the spark that really makes the fire. Now here's the second follower. This is a turning point. It's proof the first has done well. Now it's not a lone nut and it's not two nuts. 3 is a crowd and a crowd is news. A movement must be public. Make sure outsiders see more than just the leader. Everyone needs to see the followers because new followers emulate followers, not the leader. Now here come 2 more people, then 3 more immediately. Now we've got momentum. This is the tipping point, and now we have a movement. As more people jump in, it's no longer risky. If they were on the fence before, there's no reason not to join in now. They won't stand out, they won't be ridiculed, and they will be part of the in crowd if they hurry. And over the next minute you'll see the rest who prefer to stay part of the crowd, because eventually they'd be ridiculed for not joining. And ladies and gentlemen, that is how a movement is made. So let's recap what we've learned. If you are a version of the shirtless dancing guy, all alone, remember the importance of nurturing your first few followers as equals, making everything clearly about the movement, not you. Be public, be easy to follow. But the biggest lesson here, did you catch it? Leadership is overglorified. Yes, it started with the shirtless guy, and he'll get all the credit, but you saw what really happened. It was the first follower that transformed a lone nut into a leader. There's no movement without the first follower. See, we're told that we all need to be leaders, but that would be really ineffective. The best way to make a movement, if you really care, is to courageously follow and show others how to follow. When you find a lone nut doing something great, have the guts to be the first person to stand up and join in.